Boop. Happy Friday. It's Friday, June 12th, and today's daily Bible readings come to us from Psalm 116, 1 through 2, and then 12 through 19. Genesis 24, 1 through 9, Acts 7, 35 through 43, and then the alternate texts are Psalm 100 and then Exodus 4, 27 through 31. And the New Testament lesson stays the same. It's the Acts for both of those sets of readings. But today I'm going to look at Acts 7, 35 through 43. One of the questions that I think I've heard quite a bit, or maybe it's just an attitude or a feeling in these days, these times, especially in the past couple of weeks, as people have headed out into the streets to deal with issues surrounding George Floyd's death, and the frustrations and the anger that rightly and honestly have come up because of that, but not just because of that, because of a long history of that. I see people, asking and wondering, will it ever get better? Will we as humanity ever change? Will we ever get past this kind of anger and hatred and violence? And I'm not talking about what's been going on with protests. I'm talking about the things that the protests are about. And I think my question back to that would be, and I know this sounds incredibly churchy, but, my question is, can we ever lay aside our idols? Because we seem to carry them with us wherever we go. And maybe we think we're too smart to have idols. I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of us, all of us, are pretty much still caught up in idolatry and our own idols. We may not carve them out of wood and stone and things like that, but as I've said, we are caught up in them. And that's been a pretty consistent theme in the texts that we've had for our daily Bible readings since I started this in March. But because that's the Bible, and you can't get away from the Bible dealing with idolatry. So like I said, we seem to carry these idols with us wherever we go. Even as God continues to lead us through the wilderness to His great and glorious future that He has set aside for us, we still continue to carry these things on our back, as it were, or in our back pocket, and we just can't seem to get away from them. That's where we find Stephen today in this text from Acts, Stephen's testimony as he speaks to the people in power who have called him before them, the same people that a lot of whom presumably were directly responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus, his false arrest and crucifixion. And this is where Stephen's testimony is. He is recounting the story of the people of Israel, and specifically the fact that they made gods for themselves. He's talking about how God raised up Moses to deliver them out of captivity in Egypt because he'd heard their cry for liberty and freedom, to be delivered out of that bondage. And so he raised up Moses to deliver them out of that. And then as soon as they got out of Egypt and into the wilderness, and left behind the old gods of Egypt, they decided to make a god for themselves. And it even says that they reveled in the works of their own hands. And that's the thing about idolatry. I've said this before, and I'll have to say it again. But idols are all about things. They're things that we make. We seem to want gods we can control, if that makes sense. And that's really the thing about idols and idolatry. We like to set up gods for ourselves that we can control, gods that represent our power and our so-called freedom. And to maintain that, we're willing to make horrific sacrifices to keep them happy. That's why I think that Stephen even goes so far as to, because he gets pretty harsh with the people that are getting ready to kill him. He's pretty harsh, and because he brings back words from the prophet Amos, and that's what the quote you see here. If you notice when you read it in your Bible, it's set off and it has quotation marks around it. He's referencing Amos, and specifically Amos chapter 5, 25 through 27. And he says, "Did you offer to me slain victims and sacrifices for 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? No, you took along the tent of Moloch and the star of your god Raphan, the images that you made to worship. So I will remove you beyond Babylon." So Stephen's quoting Amos because the image is literally that as God was leading them out of captivity and leading them through the wilderness to the promised land, the land that he had set aside for them and was delivering them to so that they truly could freely be his people, they picture as they're following him through the wilderness, they're carrying on their back the tent of Moloch. Okay, so that's cool. Who's Moloch? I'm not going to really worry about too much about Rephan. That's reference to star gods, basically the planets we now called, I think, Jupiter and Saturn. But he says, you took along the tent of Moloch. So what is that? Moloch was you hear Moloch, you hear Molech, Malik, Malkim, I think, is another version of it. But basically it was a god or a set of practices to gods that you saw a lot, especially the Canaanite people were involved in it, the people that lived in the kind of area of Syria. They worshipped this god, and as part of that worship, they were willing to sacrifice their children. They were willing to take their innocent and weak children and sacrifice them to these gods. And so here you have, and it was a pretty brutal process. It involved literally burning the children. Matter of fact, if you don't believe this, there's actually evidence from the area of Carthage that this was a pretty common practice in the ancient Near East, where they found remains of children that were burned in ritual sacrifice. So we anyway, the image is that the people of Israel, as God is delivering them into true freedom to be with him and dwell with him, they are carrying on their back this Moloch. Like you've heard the term, you got a monkey on your back. Well, they had a Moloch on their back. And in order to maintain that, what they saw as freedom, or what they saw as the most important thing, to maintain these gods that they thought that they could make and control, they were willing to make horrendous sacrifices in order to do that. And that's the injustice that the prophet Amos is capturing about the people, is that they were, if you're willing to make that kind of sacrifice, you shouldn't be surprised at all the other injustices that follow. We are so willing to maintain our little self-idols that we've created, that we are willing to sacrifice the weak and the innocent, the people that really can't fight back, in order to maintain these things that we think are the most value and the most worth to us. And I think in today's world that has to do with a lot of probably just convenience and comfort and things like that we would rather maintain than actually follow God, because for some reason we think following him means that we are somehow less free. So will it ever get better? I think it will get better for people who follow God and are willing to lay their idols aside, for people who are willing to follow God through the wilderness, and get the Moloch off their back and set that tent aside. So, pretty rough words for today. You can thank Stephen for that, and we will see you Monday. Have a good day. Boop.